So there is a trend in the Western world to be anti-hijab because of their, to be honest, because of their history of Islamophobia, right? They have a history of this, right?
If we were to present to feminists that, for example, hijab is fard, they will never accept it. Why?
But they
Because
do.
even the conservative feminists that you're speaking about, that were speaking in support of the whole issue in Iran, saying that women should have the choice to cover or not to cover, the key word here is that they should have the choice. That's what they preach, because that is a feminist rhetoric, that women should have the choice to do whatever they want. But in Islam, we know hijab is fard. They're not supporting Muslim women wearing the hijab. They're supporting the choice for Muslim women to choose whether or not they want to wear the hijab. That's what they are preaching. That's why when women in France wanted to wear the hijab, the uproar was not the same as when women wanted to not wear the hijab. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the Sisters Corner podcast. We have been MIA for quite some time now, but alhamdulillah, we are back and we are continuing one of our special discussions that we were having with one of our viewers who had a few disagreements with some of the things that we were posting. And we had a very, very great discussion. If you guys missed part 1, you guys can find it on our YouTube channel. The link is going to be in the description of this video. So with me today is our very special guest, Sister Sanjeeda from the UK. She was with us the last time and she is back again. And Sister Sara, who you guys know because you've seen her probably a lot all over our page. Welcome, welcome, sisters. How are you guys doing?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. How are you guys?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, I'm fine as well.
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing really good, and I'm so happy to have you guys back on the show. So, Sister Sanjeeda, last time we had such a great discussion. Any thoughts or questions you want to ask as a follow-up of that discussion before we go on to maybe something new this time, inshallah?
I'd have to say, I have to admit that it was quite an eye-opening discussion that we had, seeing the different perspectives and why you might have the beliefs that you do currently. And it was something for me to think about, alhamdulillah. It was a fantastic discussion.
Alhamdulillah. Sister Sara, what do you have to say?
Well, the discussion was like 3 months ago, so I definitely don't remember everything off the top of my head. But I remember it was a very good discussion. We went back and forth quite a bit on different topics that revolved around feminism, alhamdulillah. And I remember it was very productive, and I felt like everyone involved benefited, not just Sanjeeda, but it was a good experience for everybody, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. That is great to hear. So, Sister Sanjeeda, last time we touched a little bit on feminism and Islam and if they're compatible or not. Where are your thoughts right now with the whole, is feminism compatible with Islam? Where do you stand with that at the moment?
Well, I will say that I have changed my thinking slightly, in the sense that there are some values that feminism holds that do not correspond to Islam, but I do still believe that in order for all women to have autonomy, especially to practice their deen, then I believe the implementation of feminism in Western context is necessary. But that's just how I still stand.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so did you have like a question based off of those thoughts?
I'm just wondering that okay, so let's look at the current context that is in France, right? We see that women are not allowed to wear a niqab, they are not allowed to wear a burkini. I'm just thinking that and the way they have responded was through feminism, though to no avail, but it was still through that. I'm thinking that how would you respond to something like that? How can women in a Western country, I'm not talking about obviously Middle Eastern countries or Muslim countries or Muslim dominated countries, I'm talking about Western context where there's a large amount of women. How can Muslim women be able to practice their deen without, the implementation of a blanket strategy?
Hmm. I guess I could go first, and I could share her thoughts after. Definitely, I do actually like a lot how you've differentiated the context between Muslim countries and Western countries, because there actually is a difference, right? So I believe we mentioned this last time, but when we discuss the da'wah, especially to Islam, well, the da'wah is always to Islam, but some people like to secularize the da'wah for some reason. We are actually only talking about that from a Muslim country context, because in the West, we're not calling for Islam here. We live here, we're guests here, but we're not trying to change any of the laws here, right? And so I like how you made that distinction, mashallah. But definitely when it comes to a Western context, like in France or even other countries in Europe, I believe Denmark has some anti-Islam laws and things like that. Um, Definitely, our approach should be a bit different, I would say, because you can't just go up to Western governments and be like, "Oh, you have to implement Islamic law." Like they wouldn't listen to you anyway, and they'd probably call you an extremist. But also, like this is not something that we're calling for, anyways, right? And so I understand how you might feel like, well, we need feminism in this context in order for women to get the right to wear a niqab or wear a hijab, etc. Um, but the difference is, are we really going to call that feminism, or is that just asking for our basic rights under their constitutions? You see what I mean? So their constitutions say that anyone can practice their religions freely. So why is there this discrimination against Muslims, right? So definitely from a Western context, you could always, kind of use their system against them in a way, or kind of poke out or point out the hypocrisy in what they're doing, right? Because how come your constitution and even your worldview as a liberal person, right, as a secular person, and even as a feminist, like you should have no problem with Muslim women wearing the hijab or practicing Islam in general, but you do, right? And so you could always take that approach and kind of point out the hypocrisy and the Islamophobia, but to claim feminism, right? So we're doing this in the name of feminism. That's not really true either, right? Because we're not asking for Muslim women to practice the deen, or Muslims in general to practice the deen in the name of feminism. We're doing this because we're Muslim and because we want to practice Islam, and we want to stand up for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It's not really about feminism, it's about our Islam, okay? And Islam and feminism, as we discussed last time, are not exactly the same thing. They actually are very different in many ways. Even though there might be some overlap in some of the ideas of feminism and Islam, they're still different, right? And so when we're calling for Muslims to have rights, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're using feminism to do that, right? Because you need to understand that feminism is a movement that has a specific call to it, that basically men and women should have equal rights. And also, in order to have those equal rights, women should have bodily autonomy, right? But this is clearly not the Islamic stance, right? So a feminist, for example, would say, well, why are Muslim women calling for the why are Muslim women calling to wear the hijab when Muslim men don't have to wear the hijab? So actually, them taking off the hijab makes them equal to men now, because men don't wear the hijab and women don't wear the hijab. But this is not our stance, right? So we do know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has certain laws that are different for men and women that we accept. But this is not what a feminist person would believe in, right? So I hope that sheds a little bit of light from my perspective. But I think if Sister Wad wants to go ahead and share some of her thoughts, and then Sanjeeda, you could share your thoughts again on this as well.
Yes, I think the main thing to take from this is to understand that in the West, we can't really. Okay, so there were 2 points that I want to bring up again, which Sister Sara already mentioned. The one where it's using the system against their system against them. So that is really the answer that I would have given if you were to say what should we as Muslims do. And the reason why this is a very powerful thing is because they essentially because of their Islamophobia, they end up contradicting their own liberalism, which, everybody should have the right to practice their own religion. So that in of itself should be enough to use in order for us Muslims to get our rights in the West. Because who are they to come and say everybody should be able to practice their own religion and then prohibit us from practicing our religion, right? So that really is the highlight of this point. That is what the Muslims should be doing. As for us, when we are doing the da'wah, the reason why we do not join it with feminism is because our da'wah is dedicated to establishing Islam within our own land first. Then we can go and do da'wah later on. But that's way long in the way. For now, we need to establish da'wah in our own land first. And when we begin to do the da'wah from the lens of feminism or any other Westernism or any other man-made ideology, we lose the essence of Islam. Certain aspects of Islam will be compromised. And then the whole cause is destroyed because it begins to be infiltrated by more and more man-made ideologies. And that's why from the start, it has to be pure Islam without associating it with any man-made ideologies. That would be the approach that we as Muslims in our own land would take to solving our problems. But if we were to solve or to get our rights from Western countries, we need to use their own law against them. And it's a very easy thing to do because, for example, if you lived in a monarchy or some other, in a way, we can say Western civilization has aspects of totalitarianism, but it's very subtle. But they have a very clear constitution, and it states that everybody should have the right to practice their own religion. And if they're not allowing us to do that, we can use their own system against them. What are your thoughts?
I guess I can elaborate further. But when you get those issues fixed, or okay, when she comes back, she can ask, inshallah. So yeah, basically, I would say that the 2 points to answer Sanjeeda's question really is from a Western perspective, is really just to point out the hypocrisy in the system, right? Because subhanAllah, like they really do show their anti-Islam tendencies all the time. And they've been doing that for centuries. It's not something new. It's not something that just started, 50 years ago or after 9/11 or anything like that. No, it's been happening for centuries. And the Western world has actually been very anti-Islam since the Crusades, right? SubhanAllah. And so we should use their ideas against them, right? So we should just tell them, look, like, if you truly believe in that, then you should be okay with me wearing the hijab, right? But if we try to use feminism, right, to call for, Muslim women, to basically allow Muslim women to wear the hijab, right? It basically, like you've mentioned, it dilutes the Islamic message, right? And it takes away our intention from being for Allah to being for like our nafs or some other reason, right? When it's not even really necessary, because we literally could just point out the hypocrisy and use that approach, right? We don't need to technically use feminism in this case because we could use the hypocrisy approach. Let's just call it that, right?
Yeah, so I just wanted to go back to the point where we're saying that when we do introduce feminism into the talks, then it comes with the risk of us practicing full feminism rather than Islam. I was just wondering how would that be possible, because the initial intention for you to propagate the change of laws is for Islam through the means of feminism, because that is what would be the that is how it would probably work through a Western context. Also, I just wanted to talk as well about you said something about being in Western countries and talking about the equality of men and women, and lead to questions such as should the man be wear hijab or something like that. I wanted to say that, well, within Western countries don't really exactly have Sharia law. They don't have law pertaining to compul- the act that is compulsory upon women to wear the hijab or cover themselves. So the notion that there will be that men would then want to cover themselves in the way that a woman would, I feel like that wouldn't exactly be a point of discussion within a Western country, like I said, because the laws are not propagated towards that, they're propagated towards women and their autonomy within covering themselves and practicing their deen Islam. And also, I do completely agree with the hypocrisy way to, I think that's a perfect way to go forward, utilizing, the concept of feminism that's prevalent within Western countries and using it against them. And that's a completely valid way. And when I talk about feminism, I talk about ways such as that, where you can call upon the hypocrisy, where you're able to talk about what their beliefs and using their beliefs against them. So that's one way to use feminism as well. If anyone has anything to
Yeah, so you're cutting off a little bit there, but I think I caught what you said. But obviously, if I misunderstood something, then just let me know, inshallah. So the reason why I brought up like Muslim women wearing the hijab and Muslim men not wearing it isn't to suggest that men should now start wearing the hijab so it's equal. That's not what I meant by that. What I meant was because feminists call for equality, right? They should technically be pro anti hijab, because from their perspective, this is not equal, right? So why do Muslim women have to cover, but Muslim men don't, right?
I feel
So
sorry. Okay, I just respond to that. I'm really sorry. I just feel like that's a very, no offense, but black and white approach, where because this is not equal, the feminists would be like, okay. I will admit that there are certain feminists who do say that, but in the wider consensus is that feminists, even within my community, even within communities elsewhere in other different countries, they call for, particularly in banned countries, for the women to have the autonomy to wear the hijab. That's the point of discussion. I personally haven't really heard elsewhere about it being like a law. Like, for example, you said that, okay, why can't a man wear the hijab as well, because it's not equal. But as I said, that's not the law, that's not the consensus, that's not what is being said. So just to clarify, it's the fact that I haven't, especially, like, I would consider myself as a feminist, I haven't heard that that a man should also wear the hijab, and like quite often, like maybe I might, but not to that large extent where it would actually be a problematic thing that we now need to oppose to. But that's just I just really wanted to clarify that.
yeah, no worries. So I haven't heard that either. So that's not what I'm trying to say, right? So I'm not trying to say that feminists have said that Muslim men should also wear the hijab. What I've said is that feminists have said in their books and in their protests and things like that that they're very much anti-hijab, right? Because why do Muslim women have to cover, but Muslim men don't? So I'm not saying that feminists have said that Muslim men should cover. I'm saying that feminists have said that Muslim women should uncover, right? So that way
Yeah.
they are actually equal to men from this perspective. And
Yes.
definitely, I agree with you on that. So not all feminists agree on the same thing, and a lot of feminists wouldn't agree with that, right? But I just wanted to point this out to you as well, that there is a very much a common trend amongst the feminists when it comes to the hijab, right? So, for example, what happened, and I don't want to make this a super political discussion. I'm just going to use this as an example, okay? But this is not the topic of today. So remember when the protests in Iran were happening, and I don't know if they're still happening or not. I'm not caught up on the situation there. But many Western feminists spoke out and even protests went on the street and saying that they support the women of Iran to basically choose to wear the hijab or not. But in this context, though, the women in Iran who are protesting to take it off, right? And the Western feminists very much were vocal about it. In the thousands are on the streets protesting all over the place. And they're very much in support. And there's even here in Toronto, there's signs we're going to support the women of Iran, signs in Toronto, okay? But when it comes to Muslim women who want to wear the hijab, right, like in France, for example, because you brought that up as an example, the feminists are nowhere to be seen. There's no mass protest. There's no call. There's no talk about it in the governments. There's no signs like, oh, let's support Muslim women wearing the hijab in France. There's nothing. So to be honest with you, I know that there are differences of opinion and not all feminists agree on the same thing. I agree with you on that. And I wasn't trying to say that all feminists are the same, but there is a trend here, right? There's a bias. There's a leaning towards being anti-hijab, right? That, oh, if Muslim women want to take it off, well, we have to defend their right to take it off. But when it comes to Muslim women wanting to wear it, it's just like a ghost town. Nobody says anything. And so, and this is, by the way, in the thousands of people are on the streets. Like, this is craziness, you know? So they do see our issues. They hear about them. SubhanAllah, they just don't care. Oh, she left. Okay. Then I don't know if I should keep talking, because I think her internet cut off again. But so there is a trend in the Western world to be anti-hijab because of their, to be honest, because of their history of Islamophobia, right? They have a history of this, right? So, Waan, do you want to maybe add anything to this point before she comes back, inshallah?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I think it's important to understand that, and I think we also shed a little bit of light on it the last time. I'm so sorry for all of the background noise. We're having some work done, so there's a lot of noise. But I think the most important thing to understand here is that feminists as a whole, we have to understand, number one, feminism originated in the West. And so as a whole, feminism is going to cater towards the desires of the West. And that's why even when they look at problems in the Muslim world, they will only ever shed light on something that is liberal, something that they agree with, essentially. And seeing the trends of Islamophobia, we know very well, and we can assume very quickly that they will never shed light on anything that is pro-Islamic. And that's why taking the hijab off, yes, we're going to go and we're going to protest and we're going to shed light on it. I mean, it was trending on the news. You had all these big celebrities and big people speaking about it. But how many times in the Western world itself did we hear about Muslim women who couldn't wear the hijab? I mean, just a few days ago, there was a video that was circulating where a sister was told to take off her khimar and her hijab before entering a school, you know? But where are the feminists? They're nowhere to be seen. And this shows us that essentially, even if we were to join forces with feminism in order to get our own rights, they will not support us unless it is something that essentially benefits Western civilization. And Islam is not a part of that. And we have to, I think, a very important thing we have to understand is all isms in the West, all these man-made ideologies are interconnected. So we cannot, even when we come to critiquing feminism, we cannot critique it all alone. I mean, there's a lot to say about it, but I don't think people will understand the detrimental effects of it unless they look at it from a overall perspective. When you look at how capitalism is tied to it, individualism is tied to it, all the different aspects of society when you see how whatever makes Western civilization is all interconnected, and each part benefits each other, right? So, I mean, when I first came to study feminism and all of that, I actually studied it from an economic perspective. And so when you understand how feminism, it's not just a movement for the rights of women. If you're looking at feminism just as a movement for the rights of women and you don't realize how it is interconnected to all other parts of society, that's when you don't see the actual detrimental effects of feminism in society.
Okay, so she's back. I think her internet is cutting.
Yeah, I apologize for that, but alhamdulillah, I think it's fine now. I just wanted to I think that when we are talking about feminism, we should. I think this is one of the critiques that I did have about feminism last time. It's the fact that there's a lot of about a lot of sections in it, and so one part of feminism will say one thing, the other will say the other thing. And I think that is important within the context to differentiate that, even though I do believe that, it's one of the issues I will admit. So when we were talking about, the protests within Iran, it wasn't more so, oh, take off the hijab because it doesn't align with my beliefs, the hijab per se. It's more so let the women have autonomy whether they can choose to wear the hijab. And I feel like those types of feminists come from more of a liberal perspective. And then when we are I think we make the mistake of assuming that every single feminist is a liberal. They are obviously conservative feminists who might be from a writer's perspective as well. So I think we should acknowledge that as well. And that brings me to my next point about individuals in France where they were protesting against the hijab. And those types of feminists tend to go within the conservative, where it aligns with their political beliefs, their anti-Islamic agenda, which does not necessarily translate to the entire feminist agenda. So I think that type of distinction within the current context is quite vital to do. But yeah.
Yeah. I think after this point, we should probably go back to your original question about basically how do we get rights for women from a Western context? Because I don't think we've closed that book yet. I think we still need to discuss that. But so definitely, I agree with you that when it came to these massive protests for the women in Iran, people had differing opinions about it. That's 100%. But what I was trying to say is that from a Western perspective, why is it that when women are clearly and by the way, there was videos of women in Iran taking off the hijab, burning the hijab, right? In this context, the women in Iran who wear the hijab and who want to wear it, we're not really protesting, to be honest with you. Now, definitely from a feminist perspective, right? Feminists believe that women should have bodily autonomy and they should choose, right? Which, by the way, already is not Islamic. There is no choice in the hijab, right? And so, but when it comes to the protests, why is it that when women, Muslim women, are protesting to be able to take it off, right? Because you have to understand that in Iran, everyone wears hijab because it's imposed, right? They're protesting to basically have the choice to remove it because they don't have that choice in Iran. So from this perspective, the people who supported these protests are supporting the Muslim women who want to take it off. So it's not just from a bodily autonomy perspective, it's specifically when it comes to Muslim women who want to remove it. It's not necessarily about the choice. Yes, they're calling for choice in this scenario. But the choice is what? Because wearing the hijab is not a choice. Not wearing the hijab, they want that choice to not wear the hijab. They're asking for choice to not wear it. Now, when it comes to the Muslim women in France, we're going back to this. They want the choice to wear it. From a liberal Western perspective, they want the choice to wear it. But there's no support for that. There isn't. It's silence from the Westerners. And this is basically the point that I am making, right? So yes, although maybe Muslim women who are feminist leaning saw the protests in Iran as no's about bodily autonomy, which is still problematic, by the way, which is still not the correct understanding about hijab, but we'll put that aside, okay? You might have seen it in a non-Islamophobic way or an anti-hijab way. Maybe you didn't see it that way because you're Muslim, alhamdulillah. But the Westerners who are not Muslim and who are generally very liberal, generally, not everybody, but generally liberal, they did not view it this way. They saw it as an opportunity not only to support anti-hijab, but actually to be openly Islamophobic towards Muslims. Okay, this is the reality of what had happened from a general perspective. Of course, there's exceptions, but generally speaking, this is what happened, and this is the trend from a Western perspective. So the idea that Westerners at large or in general, okay, would technically be pro hijab, which means that they would call for Muslim women to be allowed to wear it at large and in general, is simply not true, right? Because there is a bias there. Now, definitely, if you go to these pro hijab protests, then you might find non Muslims there, right? So, definitely, we're not generalizing, right? There are definitely non Muslim Westerners out there who would support it. But this is not mass support. This is nothing compared to the opposite, where people came out in the thousands to support women in Iran who want to take it off. Okay, so bias is clear. Uh, Definitely, there's outliers. Definitely, there's people who might agree with that. But in general, this is the trend that we see from a Western perspective, which means that majority of people here think this way. That's what it means, really. Does that make sense, Sanjeeda?
That does make sense, but in my when I see this, this is my perspective, right? It's the fact that, let's say, feminism has its grounds, it has its foundations of certain morals, right? If they see a moral being breached, they will then call it out. So you did say that it gives them an opportunity to call out on this, call out to be anti-hijab and Islamophobic, but calling it opportunity also categorizes feminists of being anti-Islamic, anti-Islam from its values and morals, which is,
Well, they
in my
have to
opinion,
be.
simply not true.
Well, they have to
No,
be.
it is true.
They have to.
Feminism and feminists, majority of feminists, especially those who, because you can't be a feminist and not subscribe to the values of feminism. Then in that case, you're not a feminist. And the values of feminists is anti-Islamic from its very core.
No, I do understand that. No, completely. I do understand that, the precedence of feminism, but the discussion calls upon the use of feminism to allow autonomy to all citizens, including Muslims, to perpetuate their deen. Now, and I completely understand with the Iran, with how, feminists have now gotten involved with it. And that's why I had made that distinction initially, where how can we utilize feminism in a Western context, because when we utilize feminism in a context, let's say in an Islamic country, then it doesn't really work for the Muslims, because you say that as being anti-hijab, but I feel like the discussion that we're having itself is claiming that feminists in its core is, like I said, anti-Islam, and I simply don't agree with that. And I do understand that the primary basis of feminism doesn't co-align with Islam. I agree with that. I understand that, but it's the use of feminism in Western context to allow our freedom and religious speech. And you made the example of France, but this law was made ages ago, and there had been uproar. There had been, if you looked at on the social media, you could have seen thousands and thousands of posts, especially on the feminist Instagram, which I don't personally follow, but it shows quite a lot of followers there of the feminist agenda, where they called upon this hypocrisy of France, because France is this Western country that allows X, Y, and Z, but here they are doing that. So I do believe that it can be used in a good context that allows Islam to flourish rather than within a Western country, let me clarify. So when it comes to, feminists, I just don't believe that it gives any disadvantages in the country itself that is Western.
Okay, so let me. Okay, sorry, Wat, you go ahead.
I won't
Go
take
ahead.
long, don't worry.
Okay.
The question that I have for you is, okay, so you said that it could be used to allow Islam to flourish. That part I want to dissect with you. This is very wrong. And I'll tell you why. If we were to present to feminists that, for example, hijab is fard, they will never accept it. Why?
But they
Because
do.
even the conservative feminists that you're speaking about, that were speaking in support of the whole issue in Iran, saying that women should have the choice to cover or not to cover, the key word here is that they should have the choice. That's what they preach, because that is a feminist rhetoric, that women should have the choice to do whatever they want. But in Islam, we know hijab is fard. And so even what they were preaching, we can see it as something, oh, look, they're supporting Muslim women wanting to wear the hijab. They're not supporting Muslim women wearing the hijab. They're supporting the choice for Muslim women to choose whether or not they want to wear the hijab. That's what they are preaching. That's why when women in France wanted to wear the hijab, the uproar was not the same as when women wanted to not wear the hijab. Because you have to understand, this is also a psychological thing. When man is given the choice, right? I mean, we all have temptations, okay? As much as people come out to make the hijab something so great, it is great in value, but we have to understand that every woman, to some extent, wants to be seen. That's why it's a test. That's why we get rewarded for it, for covering ourselves, right? And so when given the choice, the shiny apple that's standing there, right? Most human beings will want to go after that. And so when Muslim women are told, no, it's just a choice, just, you can choose, that is against Islam, because that is saying that that the hijab is a choice in Islam. Now, when we can get into the whole discussion of what should what should happen to the women that don't wear the hijab and all of that. We know that if you don't wear it, it's the same as if you drink alcohol. It's haram, and there's no way around it. But there's still going to be people who do it, and their punishment, they're going to be disobeyed. I mean, they're disobedient to Allah, they're going to be punished by Allah. That's the fact of it. But the West and the narrative that the West is pushing and the narrative that the feminists are pushing is that you have the choice. And this is where I'm going back to tell you, feminism from its very core, and the feminists who subscribe to it, will only push a narrative of Islam that is liberal and that aligns with feminism.
Could I do know when you say about the choice, absolutely, I completely agree that, we don't necessarily have a choice. It is forced upon us to wear the hijab, but Allah has given us free will as well. So I feel like it's more so, what about those women, like, if they want that choice, it's like, that's, Allah has given us free will, so if they don't want to wear the hijab, then that is there, obviously is problematic. But it's also a journey from some Islamic sisters for them to be forced to wear the hijab because of rulings, and if they don't, then they potentially can be killed. I feel like, yeah, Allah has given us free will as well.
Yeah. So Iran and their government system is not an example for us. So let's go back to the deen. Okay, what does the deen actually say about this? First of all, under an Islamic or under Islamic governance, okay, the hijab would be mandatory for Muslim women to wear because it's a part of the Sharia to wear it in public, and under an Islamic government, the Sharia is being implemented. So let's say a Muslim woman did not wear it, which, by the way, would probably be a very unusual case, because let's just be honest, if everyone's wearing the hijab, you're gonna wear it. you're going to follow the crowd. But let's just say there's one-off sister who, wants to just be different. Under Islamic law, she would not be killed for that. Okay, so definitely the punishment that Iran is imposing is totally un-Islamic and wrong and haram. So we don't support that at all. But would she get a punishment from the court or from the government? Yes, she would, because she's doing something haram, but she wouldn't be killed for it. Now, under Islamic law, there is no set punishment for not wearing the hijab. You see? So it really comes down to the ijtihad of the judge, really. And she could be fined $100. She could maybe go to jail for a night, right? But she's not killed for it. Like, this is overly harsh, and this is not even heard of in our history, right? So you have to understand that these governments that exist today, unfortunately, do not represent Islam in the slightest, and so we can't just see what they're doing and think, oh, well, this is Islamic law. It's not. That's not true at all.
Oh no, I didn't pertain it to Islamic law. It was just me criticizing Iran's enforcement of the hijab.
Okay, so why are you criticizing their enforcement of it?
Because they subsequently kill the individuals who don't and protest against it. That's why I believe that. Obviously, like you said, it's un-Islamic, therefore it should be openly criticized as well.
Okay, so you would criticize Iran for the way that they are doing it, but would you say the same for an actual Islamic government doing that?
Could you repeat that again, sorry?
Okay, so I understand your criticism towards Iran. I think we all would criticize Iran for many different things. But what about from an Islamic governance perspective? Let's just say that there's an Islamic government today that
like
exists.
Saudi Arabia, for example.
No, not like Saudi Arabia. No, not like Saudi Arabia.
There is no Islamic governance in today's world.
This question,
absolutely not.
Yeah, this question is a hypothetical question. There is no Islamic government today. Okay, there are Muslims who participate in politics. Fine, that's a completely different discussion. But an Islamic government is essentially a government that implements all of Islam, not like 2 or 3 laws and then the rest of it is secular, or capitalist. No, we mean an Islamic government is a government that implements all of the Sharia from an economic, financial perspective, from a social perspective, from a governance perspective. In every way, they implement Islam, not anything else. Okay, so definitely a government like this does not exist today anywhere. Doesn't exist. Okay. So hypothetically speaking, let's just say this government existed and they implemented the Sharia, which means by default that there would be mandatory hijab. And there would be a punishment that we, to be honest, don't really know what the punishment would be, because we're not in this scenario where scholars are going to do ijtihad and, find out, okay, like according to the Quran and Sunnah, what is the most fair punishment for this? Okay. But we know that it's not going to be like capital punishment. It's not that, but it's something less. But we don't know exactly what it is because we don't have the ijtihads for that right now. Let's just say this government existed and they implemented this law. Would you, as a Muslim, disagree with that? That's my question.
If it pertains to all Islamic laws, then no, I wouldn't. I'd be, yeah, that's the law. Done.
Okay, alhamdulillah. I'm really glad that you said that. Definitely, Iran is a different case, right? And here's the thing, like in Iran, look, if you're gonna kill people for not wearing the hijab, we shouldn't criticize the mandatory hijab because technically that's correct, but we should criticize the way that they punish people for not wearing it. This is absolutely ludicrous, right? So we need to have sometimes a more balanced approach on these certain things, on these sorts of topics, because we don't want to say something that might contradict the deen, right? So we're not anti mandatory hijab because it's a part of the Sharia, which is fine, right? We accept that, but we don't accept things that are not Islamic, right? So killing women because they don't wear a hijab is not from Islam. So therefore, we will criticize this, right? So we just need to be careful about the things that we say when it comes to these specific types of issues. Now, I want to come back, though, to your original question, which was, should we use feminism, right, to get rights in the West, right? And I think the point that myself and Wad have been alluding to is that, look, I mean, there's actually another point that I would like to mention, but maybe after. But the first point is that, look, if we start aligning ourselves with feminism and say, okay, we're going to use feminism and call for feminism, right, to be implemented, so we get our rights. Now, from one perspective, this would be an incorrect approach for two reasons, okay? The first reason is that feminism, by and large, does not agree with Islam, period. It just doesn't. And I know that you know that already, so I don't think we even need to talk about why. You know that, alhamdulillah, everyone here knows that, alhamdulillah. So using this approach automatically means that we will compromise the deen. Either your intentions are not going to be in the right place, or you're going to call for something, right? Like choice to wear the hijab that's actually not Islamic, right? We don't call for this. We don't call for choice. When it comes to the hijab, we don't call for choice. There are certain things in Islam that Allah has given us a choice. Allah gave you a choice between pizza and hamburgers. He didn't give you a choice between hijab and no hijab. You see? So a feminist, though, like Wa'ad was explaining, would say, no, we should have the choice. But this is not true, though. And so it's problematic when a Muslimah says this. Whatever non-Muslims want to preach, they can preach. That's fine. The non-Muslims can believe in whatever they want. But for a Muslimah to take on feminism and to say, yes, there's a choice, this is wrong. This is not correct. And this is anti-Islam. This is against the deen, right? And so when we take on the feminist approach, we will fall into these contradictions because either you're going to say the hijab is a choice, or my hands, where are they? Either you're going to say hijab is a choice or it's not a choice. So are you going to use the Islamic approach or the feminist approach? Which approach are you using?
I just want to say that, you know, when talking about in the Western context, I feel like when there is that perpetuation, where it's like when there is that ground saying that, okay, you know, it should be a choice, it'd be more so in the context that we live in a country where there's also non-Muslims, so they wouldn't wear the hijab. So why is it that, okay, it needs to be like that's the meaning of choice? Like, they're not going to be wearing the hijab, but those who are Muslims, they would obviously then want to wear the hijab. So I feel like that would be the type of outlook when it comes to that.
Yes. So, but whether people wear it or not is besides the point, right? Whether people in a Western country like France or the UK, Canada, wherever, wear it or not is besides the point. This is not the point at all. The point is what you, as a Muslimah, what are you calling for? Are you calling for feminism? Are you calling for Islam? Now, look, like we mentioned from before, the best approach to deal with the problem of, you know, Western governments taking away our rights is just to expose the hypocrisy. Look, like you say, you're liberal, so why are you wearing the hijab?
No, I agree with that. Yeah.
And so, and this is the best approach, and this is the approach that is sound, and you wouldn't fall into contradictions with the deen. But now, if you're going to call for a certain ideology, right, to be implemented, by the way, feminism is already implemented in France and these countries. Like, so calling for it, like, it's already there, right? But calling for feminism and using feminism as a tool to wear the hijab is not correct for you and your own aqidah, for your own iman. It's not good for you, right? Now, whether that's going to provide results or not is a different story. But you calling for something other than Islam is problematic in and of itself. What we should be saying is, look, Muslim women want to wear the hijab. So therefore, in France or in any of these other countries, you should not ban the hijab because we want to wear it. And also, it contradicts your own ideology and your own constitution. Like, you're oppressing Muslims, right? Now a lot of Muslim women have to choose between going to school or wearing the hijab. Like, this is unjust. This is a big injustice, right? And we should think of it from a Islamic social political activism type of perspective, right? But what I'm trying to say, and what Wa'ad is trying to say, is that, look, we should stay within the folds of Islam when we're trying to call out injustice, right? Calling out injustice is a fard in many cases. Like we have to talk about it, we have to call it out, we have to protest and all these things. But we do it in a way that is accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does that like make sense? That's the first aspect.
No, that completely makes sense. No, you mean.
Okay, that's the first aspect of the answer. The other aspect, okay, is something that we actually discussed last time when it comes to the rulings about allyship. Okay, so I know we talked about it a little bit, but we'll bring it up again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it clear in the Quran that it is haram for any Muslim to be an ally with non-Muslims. Now, what does it mean? It means that you align with non-Muslims from a social political perspective. So allying yourself with them from a social political perspective, from an ideological perspective, and when you are calling for the same thing that they're calling for, it's haram. So even from a Sharia perspective, this is haram. It's haram to do this, and it's actually clear cut in the Quran. You know, and I know that we brought up some ayat from before in the last in the last podcast. I can bring them up again if you want a refresher. But there's multiple ayat about allyship, and now it's haram to take the Jews, Christians, and the pagans as your ally. The only ally, Allah says in the Quran, the only ally of the believer is Allah, His Messenger, and the other believers. That's it. So look, if non-Muslims want to show up to our protests and chant with us that we should be able to wear the hijab, that is fine, they can do that. But we are not going to compromise our deen and call for what they want. If they would like to join us, that is totally fine. But we are not going to do that for them, because now we're doing something that is actually haram, and we're calling for something that Allah did not tell His prophets and messengers to call for. When we're doing da'wah and political activism and social activism, we stay within the confines of Islam, which is exactly what the prophets and messengers did. Okay, and so this is the other very important point that we need to keep in mind, that look, if non-Muslims want to join us, they're more than welcome to do that, but we do not compromise our values for what they want and what they're calling for. And if you want me to bring up the ayat, I can, but maybe for now, Sister Wa'ad wants to contribute, inshallah, she can.
Yeah, I think the main thing to understand when we look at from the concept of the two answers that Sister Sara gave is that when you look at feminism as a whole, because I see you mentioning the outliers and the small groups of conservative feminists and all of that, you have to understand feminism as a movement. It's a socio-political movement, meaning it is funded on a government level and by big corporations that benefit from whatever feminism has to offer. And these people are the reason why feminism technically exists. Because from an ideological perspective, there's a lot of money that goes into propagating the ideas of feminism. Okay? It has to be funded in order for it to survive, or else it's just going to die out and there's not going to be any feminists anymore. And so in order to keep it on par, they're constantly funding the movements, funding the researchers, funding the talks, the articles, the pages. I mean, social media is a great thing that they've been using to pump up this movement. These are really the people behind the success of feminism. Okay? That's one thing. The funding of feminism and the ideologies of, just hold on a second, the ideologies of feminism. Both of these, the ideologies contradicts the principles of Islam, and the people funding feminism are Islamophobic. This is what I want you to understand, because when you understand this, you understand why they will always support anti-Islamic rhetoric, even though it may be in a very subtle way, so as to say, no, women can choose to wear the hijab or not. Like, we're not against women wearing the hijab. They can choose to wear it or not. It may sound good, but it's actually anti-Islamic because, as we know, hijab is fard. Okay? They won't do it outright. Their Islamophobia It could be outright like what's happening in France, but most of the time, and especially when it comes from feminism, is very, very, very subtle. And this is very important for you to understand, because when you understand this, then you will understand why we as Muslims will never be able to embody Islam as a whole and simultaneously ally with these people. Because if the ideology of the movement and the people who are funding the movement, which essentially is, these are the two things that are the bulk of the movement, what makes the movement successful. If those are anti-Islamic, they will never support us. You have to stop looking at feminism as what a few groups of people are saying, because that's not what feminism is. It's not the opinions of a few groups of people that might come on social media and say a few nice things. That's not what feminism is. It's an entire socio-political movement that is funded by people in the higher class. It's a bigger thing than we think. And when you look at feminism from that perspective, you will understand exactly first of all, how detrimental it is, and why, whether we like it or not, we will have to compromise Islam in order for it to ally with feminism and the people who are behind it.
Jazakallah khair for that. I've just got a few with the funding, I understand that. I've read somewhere that obviously the feminist movement was there so that, I don't know, it was about getting additional taxes from women so they can gain money. I've read that somewhere as well, and I'm not denying that as well, but I feel like the anti-Islamic rhetoric isn't just exclusive to feminism, if that is true, because I haven't done my research in that, so I'm not going to make any big claims or have anything to say against it. I don't agree or disagree with it because I haven't got the knowledge for it. So I just want to say that, this anti-Islamic rhetoric isn't just, if it is, isn't just with feminism. It could be with any large corporation, every news outlet that you do, anything you buy from. It will always be, always the same companies who own them. It's always the same companies that have these high class individuals, and they have these fundings, and it's across all aspects, all political parties, all, even in Muslim countries. That's the reality. So with that in mind, if we are to then say no to feminism, should we also say no to all the vast things within, especially within a Western country, that are funded by these large corporations, these people that do have anti-Islamic ideologies? Can we also engage in them, in your opinion?
Well, I'm very glad that you said that, because this is what what I was mentioning in the very beginning of the stream, where we look at feminism from a bigger picture and its interconnection to other parts of the society. And you actually pinpointed it exactly. Yes, as big corporations, governments, Western civilization as a whole, but people behind it are the same people behind feminism. And should we say no to them? Yes. That's why we don't say we're liberals. We don't say we're Democrats. We don't align ourselves with any man-made ideology, whether it be Western or not Western. That's why when we say we are Muslims, we detach from all of these ideologies. Now we are in a situation, for example, when we look at the economic system, okay, filled with riba. And we know we are in a situation where riba is everywhere. Now, as Muslims, we have to try our utmost best to stay away from anything that might get us tangled from that. But as even we know from the hadith, where the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, where in the end of times, riba will be so common that if you don't indulge in riba itself, you will, and I'm paraphrasing, excuse me, but you will be affected by the dust of it. So you don't even have to be directly involved in riba. Somehow it's going to be there. So in a situation like this, we know we are going to somehow be faced by it. And the entire economic system of the entire world is like this. We can't really escape it. Now we can always choose the lesser of the evils. But now, are we going to go and support the economic system? We're not going to support the economic system. We're never going to say riba is okay. because we know riba is not okay. Do you get what I'm saying? So at the same time, we are not going to accept the elements of feminism or any part of man-made ideologies that contradicts Islam, even if we are put in a situation where we are forced to be exposed to it. Especially when we're coming and we're doing da'wah, especially when we're coming with a cause. So in your life to life, like personally, you may be exposed to it, but when you're coming up with a revolution or a activism or a cause and you're speaking, we never accept any part of it and try to ally it with Islam. Like it's like saying that the modern economic system is compatible with Islam in so and so and so way. Or riba, this is a way in which riba is acceptable in Islam. We can't, that's how it sounds when you try to make feminism and Islam, when you try to put feminism and Islam together. And that's why you end up making Islamic things feminist. So when Islam says it is fard, no, let's change it a little bit and say, no, it's a choice.
Go ahead. So if Sanjeeda, if you want to, say something else, you can. I just wanted to also contribute to answering your question about aligning ourselves with other ideologies. But if you have something to say, go ahead. You can go first, and I'll go after you, inshallah.
No, it was within that topic. It was just my question towards Sister Wide. I was just wondering that, let's say you're in America, for example, and you've got the Conservative Party, you've got the Democrat Party, and I was just wondering that in your perspective, are Muslims permitted to vote?
Yeah, subhanAllah. This is it is definitely off topic from this topic. SubhanAllah, I literally just had a halaqah the other day on feminism, and then the voting came up again. So I'm just laughing because the same thing's happening right now. Because and the thing is, I'm really not surprised that people are asking the voting question when we talk about feminism, because myself, Wa'ad, and others who try to tackle feminism from an ideological perspective, we always end up talking about legislation. And then people are like, well, can you vote? And then, yes, that's why it comes up. Because at the end of the day, right, the feminist will say that the legislator is myself, whereas the Muslim says the legislator is Allah. This is really the difference. If you really want to, summarize it and, talk about it in a nutshell. So Sanjeeda, if it's okay with you, I just wanted to kind of give an answer to your question, inshallah. They just opened up the Quran here on my phone, and there's an ayah in Surah At-Tawbah, and I'm going to read it in English. So Allah says, or the translator says that Allah said, okay, do you believers think that you will be left without Allah proving? Wa'ad, you're unmuted. Wa'ad, you're not muted. Okay.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. All right. So the ayah says, do you believers think, and again, this is in Surah At-Tawbah, it's ayah 16. Do you believers think that you will be left without Allah proving who among you truly struggles in his cause and never takes trusted allies other than Allah, his messenger, or the believers? And Allah is all aware of what you do. So Allah is saying here in this ayah, do you think that I'm not going to put you to the test? Do you think that I'm not going to put you on trial to see who's going to struggle in his cause? And by the way, his cause is what? His cause is the da'wah. Okay, who's going to struggle in the da'wah? Which is, by the way, in the da'wah is always ideological. Okay, so who's going to struggle in his cause, in the da'wah, in the ideological struggle? Okay, obviously with the kuffar, right? So, because obviously they have a different ideology than we do. So Allah's saying, who do you think that I'm not going to test you in this? Do you think that I'm not going to see which one of you are going to struggle in my cause, in my da'wah, and who will never never take any trusted ally from a political, social, ideological perspective other than Allah, His Messenger, and the believers? Do you think I'm not going to test you in this? So when you ask the question, should we align ourselves with other ideologies, right? Fine. If not, fine. Feminism, we shouldn't be aligning ourselves with it. But what about liberalism, red pill, communism, Marxism,
Yeah, exactly. All of that.
these
Yeah.
things, right? The answer is no for all of it. Because yes, this conversation is about feminism, but if you really come down to the root of all of these ideas, they all contradict Islam, all of them. Okay, even and by the way, another very controversial one is democracy. We can have a whole other podcast about that. A very controversial one is democracy. Democracy, liberalism, secularism, feminism, red pill, communism, capitalism, Marxism. All these ideologies contradict Islam. They all do from a fundamental perspective. And so Allah is saying, do you think I'm not going to test you to see who's going to stick by me and who's not? Because the pressure is on. Let me tell you, the pressure to conform and to water down the deen and to tiptoe in how you talk about Islam is high, you know? And even Allah says in another ayah, let me read that to you, inshallah. Okay, it's in Surah Al-An'am, okay, and it's ayah 129. Allah says, this is how we make the wrongdoers destructive allies of one another because of their misdeeds. So Allah is saying that the allies, right, or the allies who are non-Muslims, okay, the non-Muslims are only allies to each other. The wrongdoers are only allies to each other. This is what Allah is saying. He's saying this is how we make the wrongdoers destructive allies of one another because of their misdeeds. So Allah actually makes the communists and the capitalists and the Protestants and the Catholics and whoever, okay, allies to each other because of their kufr. This is actually a punishment for them because with their allyship and with their plotting and their planning and against Islam, this is actually to dig their own grave. This is what it is, right? And so we should never align ourselves with anybody else, right? Because Allah has made it haram and because it's destructive. It's destructive for us and it's destructive for them. They're digging their own grave. We might see the Western world and China and all these non-Muslims thriving, but Allah tells us as well in the Quran, don't be deceived by this. Don't. Because you might think that they're doing well, but at the end they're going to be destroyed, just like all the other nations who rejected Islam. Okay? That's one thing. The other thing is that when we talk about Islam from a social political movement perspective, okay, which is basically the da'wah. Look, let's bring it back to feminism, okay? So we don't get too off topic. Look, the feminists in the West, because feminists are majority in the West, right? I know there's feminists elsewhere, but majority of them are in the West. Are they, Sanjeeda, I want to ask you this question, okay? Are they still, to this day, calling for women's rights? Yes or no? It's just a yes or no question. Are they still calling for women's rights, or have they achieved what they wanted? What do you think?
To answer your question, I would have to say, and I know this might not be something you might agree with, but I would say yes, that they are still fighting for rights only because of the Roe invade, what happened in America in terms of abortion. So in regards to that, I'd say yes.
You say yes, that they are still calling for women's rights.
Yeah.
Okay. From a feminist perspective, right?
From a feminist perspective, if you look at America and the whole abortion thing, yeah.
Yeah. So definitely, this is correct. So from a feminist perspective, they are still calling for women's rights from the framework of feminism, right? So, and it's been how long? How many years have feminists been calling for their rights?
Just over 100 years.
Okay, perfect. Now let's compare that Okay, because you have to understand feminism is a social justice movement for women, right? It's a socio-political movement that calls for equal rights for women compared to men and bodily autonomy for women. Okay, this is what feminism is in a nutshell. Now, compare this to the Islamic da'wah. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ did da'wah to Islam to establish Islamic law. Okay, because that's what da'wah is. Da'wah is to establish Islamic law in the land from a political and social perspective. Okay, he did this for how many years?
All his life, or
Well,
majority of his life.
not majority of his life. So he when did he become a nabi? What age?
40.
Yeah, so he
I
was
haven't
40. Okay, it's okay. So he became a nabi when he was 40 years old. Okay, and he did the da'wah to Islam over 23 years, right? Because the Quran was being revealed to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over the course of 23 years. Okay, and what he was doing basically was calling for Islam in those 23 years. And he was not just calling for the pagans to stop their idol worship, but he was calling for political and social reform in the Arabian Peninsula at that time. Okay, so he was calling for people to, from an ideological perspective, convert to Islam, so to believe in Islam, right, and be convinced of it from an idea perspective. And so that's the first point. The second point is that he was also calling for its establishment. He was calling for others to live by Islam, to practice it. Okay? These are the two things he was calling for. Now, he achieved this in just over 2 decades, 23 years, right? Now, how is it that if feminism is the answer to women's problems, why is it that feminists have been calling for justice and liberation for women from a feminist perspective for over 100 years and they still haven't achieved it? And there's been 3 waves of feminism. There's going to be a 4th wave of feminism, okay? Compared to the da'wah to Islam by the Prophet ﷺ, which he achieved successfully in just over 20 years. How come the feminist approach did not provide results, but the Islamic approach provided results? So why is it that when Muslimas who know their deen, who read the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, who know what happened, why would they think that Allah and His Messenger don't have the solution for me, but these feminists do? From an ideological perspective, not only is that a contradiction, but it's flat out wrong. Because the Prophet ﷺ brought results. He flipped the Arabian Peninsula upside down in his lifetime. All it took was a lifetime. That's it. His lifetime. That's it. Now, compare that to the feminists. I'll keep talking even though she cut out. Compare that to the feminists. They've been going at this for generations and they still don't have results. So from a social political movement perspective, from a social activism perspective, would you rather pick something that is proven to bring results? Or are you going to pick something or pick a strategy? Are you going to pick a strategy that has been proven to provide results? Or are you going to pick a strategy that has been proven to fail? You're going to pick the one that has been proven to work for women. Like, this is just, it doesn't even make sense to pick or align yourself with the feminist approach over the Islamic approach, right?
I think this was a point that we also discussed in our last podcast as well. With
yes, it is. But it's a very
Islam as the tool to obviously have
Yes,
rights. But
because it's a very
yeah,
big point, right?
yeah,
Yeah. So, like, whether you look at it from a Western perspective or Muslim world perspective, okay, look, feminism is never the answer. What the Western world really truly needs is Islam. But let's just be honest, they're not at that place to accept it. They're not. And Muslims are also not at that place to show them what Islam is. We're not. Every time a Westerner thinks of Islam, they think of Saudi Arabia and Iran. And look what they're doing, right? Or ISIS or the Taliban. You see what I mean? Like, we need proper representation of Islam and Muslims in politics. This is what we need. For the Western world to truly see what Islam is all about. Look at what happened with Qatar in the World Cup. Now, definitely, Qatar, their government is not perfect, so I'm not praising them. I'm not praising them. But there is still a lesson to learn here. When non-Muslims from all over the world are going to Qatar, okay, she cut off again, but I'll continue. Non-Muslims from all over the world came to Qatar to watch the World Cup and they learned about Islam. They're like, oh, like, Arabs and Muslims, they're actually really nice. And I learned about Islam and a lot of people converted to Islam. So you see, when there's government influence to actually talk about Islam in at least a good way, I wouldn't say that the Qatari da'wah is perfect. Okay, I wouldn't say that. I don't think that they gave the full understanding of Islam. They probably secularized it, but anyways. But at least, but it shows us that when there is government influence, people will listen. You see, even if we take a non-Islamic example, right? Let's say COVID-19. Okay. Now, a lot of people just believe the government, right? Oh, you have to take the vaccine, you have to wear a mask, and all these things, right? And so clearly, governments have a big impact on the way that people think, right? And which is why we know from a da'wah perspective that the only way non-Muslims and the West will accept Islam is when and only when Islam is implemented in politics in the Muslim world, period. Which is why we have to do da'wah to Islam in the Muslim world, period. This is it. This is the answer.
And
Like,
we can see it from the seerah,
yeah,
from
and
the
this is,
seerah itself. The only
yes,
time the Prophet sent messengers to other nations was after the establishment of Islam in Medina. Every da'wah that happened before that was for the Muslims themselves. The only time Islam actually started to spread out of the Islamic world, let's say at that time it was only Medina, and then after that it was Mecca. The only time it started to spread out of that was when there was a government behind it. Governance, subhanAllah.
yes, exactly. So, we care about non-Muslims. We want what's best for them. But right now, as it is, they're not ready to accept Islam. They're not. And they won't accept it until we implement it. SubhanAllah. So when we wanna, Sanjeeda, your original question is, how do we get Muslim women their rights, right? Because we're talking about Muslim women. How do we get their rights in a non-Muslim Western country? Well, if, like, sure, we could, use the other methods that we talked about, right? Like pointing out the hypocrisy, for example, that's good. But if we really want to nip it from the bud, okay, she keeps disconnecting, but I'll keep talking. um, but if we really want to nip the issue from the bud, okay, it starts with the Muslim world. It doesn't start here, right? And so when we engage in the da'wah, learn our deen, implement the deen, call for the implementation of the deen in the Muslim world, by and large, this is going to have a ripple effect on the whole world. By the way, the whole world is going to be affected by this. Policies are going to change. Economics is going to change. The world order is going to change. Politics is going to change. So this is going to actually solve the problems from a holistic perspective. That we're not just always looking for a band-aid solution. Okay, We want to solve the problem altogether, right? And so, in order for us to really do that, we should be doing the da'wah to Islam in the Muslim world, okay? Or at least calling for it, okay? So, if we want to help Muslim women in the West, we need to help Muslims in the East, basically, first, to really see that change, that positive impact, right, on other people. Because at the end of the day, the whole world needs Islam to really, truly, you know, live a relatively just life. Of course, you know, this dunya is never going to be perfect, but it would be a lot better with Islam, right? We know that. Does that make sense, Sanjeeda? I know you cut off a little bit. I'm not sure how much you caught of that.
No, that does make sense. I do believe that in any issues that any country faces, whether it's political, social, the implementation of Islam is the cure to everything, whether it is, you know, interpersonal relations or, you know, even physical illnesses. I believe that Islam is the answer. I totally agree with that. And that's the reality, but we have to also look at the current reality in which, yes, reformation within the Muslim countries needs to occur for it to be a domino effect to the Western countries for reformation. I agree with you, I really do. But sometimes, like you said, we can't have a band-aid solution. And yeah, you're right. We need to obviously go to the root cause of things. But the but was coming. But what shall those women do currently as the band-aid solution? And yes, you say we can't use feminism, or we can use feminism in this sort of way. And I was just wondering, and I do want to divert the topic just a little bit. What can we do besides dawah? Besides, in a realistic, obviously it is realistic to have dawah. I'm not saying no to that. But currently, as a band-aid solution, what can we do outside of feminism? You said to enforce, you know, religious representation within politics, but then within that, shouldn't that mean that they are now conforming to an ideology, if that makes sense? Like, if they're going to be in politics, then I don't know if they're in Labour Party, because in the UK there's a lot of Muslim representation, and the Labour Party, like, is what they're doing wrong? So it just brings the question to that as well. Like, yeah, so I was just wondering, what's your opinion on different ways we can address the situation that does not conform to an ideology?
I would say, let me just interject here quickly. From my personal perspective, what I would say is, what you're asking what we can do now in our current context. Okay, so aside from the da'wah, we start with the da'wah, so we can start some sort of a change so long in the Muslim world. But what can we do in the West? I'm still going to hold the position of using Western law against itself when they try to, because we cannot change Western civilization and make it Islamic. Certainly not going to happen if we don't even have Islamic governance here. So when you speak about political representation and you see it in the UK or any other place, that's wrong from the very beginning, because what you're saying is, if we have that representation, somehow we can make a change from a political perspective.
Oh
No,
no,
that's not what
I
we
was
want.
saying that doesn't conform to what Sister Sarah had said, that, you know, a Muslim cannot conform to a political ideology. But then she went on to say that there needs to be representation, and then that's where I came in with the point where, okay, if there is representation, then wouldn't that be through association? And then that in itself is problematic. So how can we go forward through this, because that's not an option?
Yes, no, I think what Sister Sara was saying is, she was saying it from in the Muslim world. So
Oh right,
that
okay.
political representation is from the Muslim world, not in the
Okay.
Western world.
I
We cannot,
apologize.
they won't allow us to have proper Islamic representation in the Western world to begin with. And so what could the Muslims do? The only thing we can do in the Muslim world, I mean, in the non-Muslim world, in the Western world, is, if they are depriving us of our rights, we fight back using the system against them, using their system against them. And at the same time, we try our best to revive Islamic governance within the Eastern world. And the only way we can do that is through re-educating the Muslims and da'wah. So, which is basically the same thing. So those are the two things that we essentially, from my perspective, Sister Sara can add if she has any more points. But from my perspective, that's what we should do. If you're living in the West, we cannot try to implement Islam from a societal or governmental level. We just have to make sure that we are able to live as Muslims. And if we are in the case that we're not able to live and we're not able to practice our deen, then we have two choices. Either we make hijrah to a place where we can practice our deen, or if we have the ability to use the liberal government and the liberal constitution against them by saying, hey, you said we can all practice whatever we want to practice. Let us practice our religion like you state in your constitution. Those are the two things that we can do. And then add on top of that the change that we want to make in the Eastern world. That is essentially what we can do right now as Muslims.
Yes. So definitely from a Western perspective, they would never allow us to have proper representation. So unfortunately, I would say basically all of them, to be honest, except maybe there's an exception of a very few Muslims who participate in Western politics. They basically left the deen. Like, you know, the things that they say and what they stand for and what they call for, it's not Islamic, you know. And also from a liberal Western perspective, they use these Muslims, you know, these Muslims from India or Pakistan, from the Arab world, as just like it's just like a token to say, hey, we're inclusive and we're not racist or anything. But at the end of the day, you only accept people who think like you. You don't accept anybody else who doesn't, right? So they're not inclusive, even though they try to pretend to be. They're not. They're actually very intolerant. And by the way, like I have a degree in religious studies, okay? And so, subhanAllah, I actually experienced this firsthand. Even from a university perspective, they will never allow you to do a master's or PhD if you don't conform to their ideology. If you're not a Western, secular, liberal, feminist, atheist, they're just going to reject you, okay? And that actually happened to me. They literally rejected me because I was too Islamic. They literally put that in the rejection email, okay? I experienced this firsthand. I know exactly what Wa'id is saying because this is 100% true, subhanAllah. And so when we talk about Islamic representation, we're talking about it in the East, okay? We want proper Islamic implementation, and with Muslims who actually, first of all, are pious and who know the deen and who actually care deeply about the ummah. This is the representation that we're talking about, but unfortunately, it's not there anywhere. And until that happens, we won't really see real change, to be honest. But that starts with us, right? So the people, right, the Muslimin, the ummah, needs to call for this, right, in order for it to happen. Because trust me, when the people mobilize and when there's millions of people protesting for the same thing all over the world, that's gonna cause a huge ripple effect. Because the people actually have more say than you think. But unfortunately, the people are quiet, right, and don't want to talk because they're like, oh, if we talk and it's going to cause problems in our country. And look, it's a struggle. Allah says, do you think that I'm not going to test you to see who's going to struggle in my cause? Because it is a struggle. Actually, it's the hardest thing to do is this. SubhanAllah. Even the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in an authentic hadith, that the biggest jihad is to stand up against a tyrant ruler. The biggest jihad, the biggest struggle is to do this, you know? But this is the cost if we really want change, not just for the Muslim ummah, but for the world. We got to sacrifice. We got to put in the work. We have to be vulnerable. Otherwise, it's never going to happen, right? But more people need to start really being convinced of this da'wah and of this message. Because people are too complacent and just want to live their life and, you know, work and have babies and that's it, right? And with that mentality, then nothing's ever gonna change, to be honest with you. And so definitely we don't take the route that the non-Muslims have taken, because not only is it destructive, not only is it haram, and it's also not a solution, right? Which is the other point that I was making, right? So feminism didn't provide really solutions for women. Like, definitely things are better for the Western woman now than before, but they're still calling for justice. So like women are still oppressed. That's what you need to understand. Yes, women can work and women can own property and women can get a divorce, and that's all great. But are women still sexually assaulted in the West? Are women still murdered in the West? Are women still discriminated against? Are women still treated like poorly here? Yes, they are. It still didn't provide the solutions that feminists were looking for. And feminists, by the way, don't really have solutions. SubhanAllah, if you actually go to the Women's March or their protests and you actually hear what they have to say, when it comes to a solution, they don't really have one. Feminists, by the way, I'll give them this. I'll actually give them this one. They're very good at pointing out the problem. They're very good at saying, here's the problems and here's why these problems exist. But when it comes to the solution, they're not very good at that part, right? Because they're trying to figure out a solution to their problems from a secular liberal lens. It's not from guidance from Allah. So of course you're not going to have a solution to your problem, because how are you, as a finite, ignorant human being, how are you supposed to come up with a solution? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows way more than we do. And Allah has our best interest. So Allah is in the perfect position to give us a solution for our problems. And also, He is in the perfect position to tell us how to live. And until we submit to this and we humble ourselves and we stop thinking that we know it all and we have all the answers, then you're not going to get anywhere. You're really not.
100%. I just want to add to the point that you mentioned of how feminism didn't give a solution. And because you can chant about feminism and what it's done, okay, what it's accomplished. But when you look at society and you realize even the things that feminism has been able to accomplish for women, if we look at it from a statistical perspective, particularly of women in the West, many women are unhappy. And there are numerous studies that show women who have rights, they have most of the rights that the fundamental rights, let's say, the ones that they started with in the very beginning. They have it, but despite that, they are unhappy. And I wish I could have been able to share my screen, but I'll actually link them in the bottom in the description box, and I will send it to you, Sanjeeda, because it's very important that we understand that despite over a century now of feminism, women are still unhappy. And the problem is, not only now are women unhappy, but the whole of society is in a imbalance. What was his name? It slipped my mind, but there was a man who wrote about maternal deprivation and the effect on children when they don't have a mother figure present in their lives, and how that is very, very detrimental to their cognitive development, and how that leads them into weak personalities and many other problems, mental health issues that children and teenagers experience, and all of that leads them into drugs, peer pressure, and all of that. And also the issue of men and how men have been affected by the system that is now being put in place, how they have been emasculated by feminism. So when you look at feminism and the impacts of feminism on society, I mean, honestly, as a person, even if I was not a Muslim and I were to objectively, as a Western person, look at feminism and look at its impacts on society, I would be disgusted. I would not associate myself with it. Because when you read society and how women are now unhappy, children are unhappy, men are unhappy, the only people who are essentially very happy with what's going on are the people who funded it in the first place. When you realize that, it's very clear feminism is not the solution. And I can go on to say that liberalism is also not the solution. Democracy is not the solution. Once again, when we are speaking about feminism, we're not only speaking about feminism in seclusion. We highlight feminism because for example, from the Sisters Corner's perspective, if you see me and the da'wah that I do on the side, I also speak against democracy and political Islam, and I advocate for that. I speak against liberalism. I speak about other things. But if we're looking at the Sisters Corner, that is that is dedicated to feminism. But that doesn't mean that all the other isms and all the other parts of Western civilization or any other man-made society, for that matter of fact, is correct. Just because we're not speaking about it doesn't mean it's correct. Because if you go and you see my personal content, or even Sister Sara's personal content, we do speak about other isms as well. But when you look at the Sisters Corner specifically, we tend to focus a little bit on feminism, which I think what I want to do a little bit, what I want to change with the way that we're doing things is I want to begin to speak about feminism as a part of a system, where, because when you understand the whole system and you understand how it's interconnected, you understand how if we submit to one part of it, essentially we're going to have to submit to all of it. And then slowly, every part of Islam is going to disappear if we do that. And that's why we don't want to do that. But yeah, that's what I wanted to mention. Sister Sanjeeda, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's just I think it's a very interesting, and it's quite original to me. I haven't really heard it elsewhere. Like when one criticizes feminism, then they always, like, I've had discussions with other individuals as well, and they tend to be very red pilled, and they have this hyper masculine, this swear word type of ideology, and this angry, it was that type of exchange. So I will also admit, it's a personal bias to me, so when I talk to someone and they're anti-feminist, then I would assume that they're like red pill, or that they conform to other ideology, which is problematic in it of itself. But to have a discussion and talk about how it's not just feminism that you're opposed to, it's all ideologies, then I think that's a very refreshing and original. I haven't come across that. So yeah, I feel like in terms of that, I just want a definitive answer in terms of, I know we're going back to a certain topic, and I just want a yes or no, because it's just I'm building on my own perspective, and I want to, because I discussed this with my religious teacher as well. So in terms of the voting thing, are we as Muslims allowed to vote in a Western country? Is it yes or no? So I can then obviously forward this to my Islamic teacher and we can have a discussion on it.
Okay. I know Wa'ad is not in the West, so maybe those around her don't really discuss this that much. The answer is no. Okay. And by the way, this is a very controversial topic. If you go speak about it with other people, you're going to hear other opinions. I'm just letting you know. But let me just explain why it's no. Okay. So let me ask you very simple questions, Sanjeeda. Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the legislator or not?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Alhamdulillah. So does that mean that if Allah is the legislator, somebody else should also be the legislator, or could be the legislator as well alongside Allah?
Not alongside Allah.
Okay, what about instead of Allah?
No, that'd go against belief.
Okay. So when politicians are in parliament, right, you're in the UK, right? So I'm assuming you're in Britain. When they sit in parliament and they debate and discuss about what laws they want to implement, are they using the Quran and Sunnah are they implementing the Quran and Sunnah, which is from Allah, or are they thinking about what to implement from their own minds?
I wouldn't say minds, but I agree in the sense that it's not from an Islamic point of view.
Okay. So, but what I'm asking is, when they're in parliament and they're debating, right, in a circle or whatever, are they thinking about what should be the law from their own selves or not?
It's more so the generalized belief of the political, but obviously it's not religious, but your point still stands.
But is that from themselves, or is that from Allah?
It's from the people, but not from Allah.
Yeah.
So it's from the human being, basically.
Yeah, exactly, from the people.
Okay. So if you were to vote, are you agreeing with that or not? Or are you supporting it in some way?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you think it's okay to support others who are being mini gods?
I personally wouldn't see them as mini gods. I feel like throughout all of history there have been leaders, and to then subjugate them to the same authority of Allah, astaghfirullah, I just don't agree with that.
Okay, so when you participate in a system, though, that says that Allah is not the legislator, I'm the legislator, okay, which is basically a system based off of disbelief in Allah, to be honest. When you go to vote, are you not participating in that?
I don't believe leadership comes with the inherent position that Allah does not exist, mazallah. I mean, if I look at it, obviously this is not Islam, but just speaking in a different perspective, let's say, the old political standing of Britain, of England, more
So we're
precisely,
talking about
you'd
Muslims.
see that their leaders were from, like, they would use religion as their current context in terms of legislation. So I know this is not about Islam, but it's just an example that I don't really, I think the whole comparison between leaders and then the position of Allah, I feel like that link is a little bit, I personally think is problematic, because what about people who are muftis, right? And when we consult people about issues about our Islam, about things that pertain to Islam, so for example, like your lifestyle or something, and then you go ask them that, okay, like, can I get information on this, on that, then are they not playing that role that isn't for them, because they're giving an opinion that is related to Islam? But I just believe that it's the whole political standing as well is, yeah, I don't agree with that comparison.
Okay. So I wasn't comparing anything actually. I was just asking you, is it okay to support something that's haram, basically?
No.
So why vote?
Sorry?
So why vote?
But voting explicitly said to be haram though?
In a Western
Putting
context, is what
human
you're
beings.
asking.
Oh, in a Western context, yeah, that's where I want to discuss with my religious teacher, because I know, like, we have the different I'll get a different opinion, but that's something I'm gonna get extra, because I don't want to just say yes, you are right. I want to do my own research and, like, think about it, get different, like, get resources and absolutely I want to get that as well. Um, so I
Yeah.
can't say yes or no
I think
currently.
the main thing here is, what you can say is the reason why it's haram to vote in the Western context is because the West puts man as the sovereign, as as the legislator. So you mentioned something about, like, the past of Britain. They didn't have voting. It was a monarchy before the constitutional part came.
Yeah,
They didn't
exactly.
have voting. So when we're speaking about voting in the modern context, it's secular. What does secular mean? Secularism is putting man as the legislator of himself and as sovereign. These are the two characteristics which in Islam is solely attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, what about, you mentioned about the muftis or the people who, when we go and we ask them about our personal perspective, all of that goes back to the Quran and the Sunnah. And the Quran and the Sunnah comes from who? From Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they're not making up rulings based on their own principles and just that is coming from them. They have a source of guidance. And there's a whole process in which they go to extract the fiqh, the jurisprudence. So it's not like now anybody can come and do that. No, no, no. But the main thing to understand is these people put Allah as the sovereign and Allah as the legislator. In the West, when you are voting in the West, you are voting to put whoever is in power, whoever is in the parliament, whoever you're voting for, you're putting that person as the legislator. Because today in the West, nobody puts God as a legislator because of secularism. So now when you as a Muslim go and vote for that person, you are voting to put that person as a legislator. Are you voting to put Allah? No. There's no one speaking about Allah. You can be given 5 parties in America, and none of them are going to be speaking about Allah. None of them in any Western context. So a Muslim voting in the West is essentially voting to put whoever they voted for as a legislator on top of Allah. And from a general perspective, you are voting to put somebody else as sovereign instead of Allah. So from a whole generic perspective.
So you mentioned that within just the dunya itself, there's no Islamic governance at all. Does that mean that there's no one's in this world is allowed to vote, essentially?
So I'm not sure what the ruling is on Muslims voting in a Muslim country. I have not looked into that, so I'm not going to give an answer, to be honest. But because I live in a Western country, I have looked into what applies to me personally. And so, just based off of what myself and Wad have said, from a Western context, by the default is that it is haram, right? Now, there is some difference of opinion on this issue. And by the way, even if you ask other people about the voting, you might even get people who say, yeah, it's okay to vote. But I'm telling you what my understanding is, okay? Because this is a controversial topic. Now, the other opinion, though, now, what if, let's say, you're in a Western country and Muslims are being oppressed, right? Like in France, for example, or in the case of in the case of France, let's just take France as an example. Um, basically, there's the choices between two different presidents, and one president is going to ban the hijab and one president is not going to ban the hijab, right? Now, from this context, right, should Muslims vote for the lesser of the two evils, right? For the person who's not going to ban the hijab, right? Or who's better from an Islamic perspective than the other one, right? They're both not good. But if we don't vote, are we going to start getting oppressed and all these things? Then look, there's a difference of opinion in these circumstances, right? Because now some scholars say that in this specific case, it would be okay to vote because you don't want the Muslimin to be oppressed in this case. And then there's another opinion that says actually it would still be haram. Okay. So there's differences of opinion on this issue. Depending on who you ask and their opinion on it, you might get a different answer. But because you asked this question to myself and Wide, we answered it to the best of our ability and from our understanding. And look, at the end of the day, from an ideological perspective, being supportive of something that is haram would be haram, right? So you wouldn't say that, oh, it's okay to, like, I know that homosexuality is haram, but it's okay to support it politically. This is not correct, right? Supporting haram is haram, right? And so when it comes to voting, are you going to support people who don't legislate by what Allah has revealed? Well, you shouldn't, right? You should not be doing that. And at the end of the day, if Muslims feel a lot of pressure to vote because they might be oppressed or something like that, then that's a different discussion. But in general, the general ruling is that, from my understanding, it would be haram, yes.
Yeah. Okay. I was also thinking about. I'm not sure if we have enough time yet because Suad said that we have 15 minutes. So I'm not sure. But I do just want to get a point across if time allows it. Is that okay?
I'm not sure if Wa'ad has to leave, but if you want to say your point quick, then I think that'd be okay.
Okay, so as you said, there are difference of opinion, right? And this type of difference of opinion is within Islam as well, is quite apparent. You've got different types of Muslims, you've got different types of beliefs, you've got different sections and how and how other individuals have pertained to their Islamic belief. Absolutely. And this is just an issue, obviously, because I'm doing education studies, we're looking into this. Let's say, for example, in Pakistan, right? There's a lot of different Muslims. So how can and because it's a Muslim country, they tend to have their curriculum, surrounded by Islam as well, including Islam. So one of the issues within Pakistan was integrating the curriculum, but how with Islam, but how can they do that because everyone had a different belief? And I believe that can also pertain to a political standing where, let's say, for example, hypothetically, there's a Muslim leader and they are now, they're being for a vote, if a Muslim is a different Muslim from that political leader, can they vote for that political leader even though they are Muslim, but they're a different type of Muslim and their beliefs don't necessarily align? I was wondering what your opinion was to that.
So what do you mean by their beliefs don't align? Like, are
So
they?
let's say, for example, I the okay this okay, this is like on the top of my head. Do you know Maulid? Some people celebrate it, some people don't. So
Okay.
let's say the leader doesn't celebrate Maulid, and yeah, and then the believers and the voters, they do, for example, celebrate, and some don't. It's fine. Can they now vote for that person in power, even though they're a different type of Muslim?
So on the issue of Maulid, there's differences of opinion on that. But whether you practice it or whether you don't, it doesn't really take you outside of the fold of Islam. Like, you're still a Muslim, whether you do or you don't. Um, like, so when you were saying like Muslims who have different beliefs, like, I thought from a more foundational perspective, like if this person's preaching liberalism or something. But look, at the end of the day, if Muslims, because the thing is, all Muslims, by the way, have differences of opinion on Islamic issues. Like, not all, like none of us really agree on every single thing, right? And there are lots of differing opinions in Islam and in our scholarship, which is fine. So on that basis, we wouldn't really decide whether or not it's okay to vote for that person on the basis of having differing opinions on the basically on the issues where scholars have differed. Okay, we're more concerned about supporting people and voting for people who have fundamental differences than us and who basically are disbelievers, like, or who are openly disbelievers, right? So this is really what we're talking about. We're not really talking about the people who differ on us on the more ambiguous issues within the deen where there's difference of opinion. We're talking about the more foundational differences where, these differences put somebody outside of the fold of Islam, basically. Does that
Oh
make
no,
sense?
I understand. Yeah, but it was just out of curiosity, really, where the conversation was going.
Yeah. Like I said from before, I'm not sure if Wad has a different answer, but I personally have not asked about this issue in a like in a Muslim country context. So that's why I just want to stay silent on it, because I haven't asked about it. But I would assume that there would be also differences of opinion, and not everyone's going to agree, right? So, like, I would assume that, but I personally don't have an answer from a Muslim country context. But from a Western context, I think my answer was pretty clear, alhamdulillah. I'm not sure if Wad wants to maybe give her points or end us off. I think she has to go, but does that help with your answer a bit, Sanjeeda, or your understanding?
No, absolutely, it did. Yeah.
Okay, alhamdulillah. So as of right now, I guess, like, do you feel like we answered your primary concern that you had earlier, or?
No, yeah, I think it was well addressed across all points.
Okay, alhamdulillah. So you would say that you have a better understanding now on the issues of Muslim women in a Western context.
Yeah.
Okay, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. I do have to leave after this, so I think we can wrap up here, inshallah. Sister Sanjeeda, I want to thank you so much for coming here and sharing your thoughts with us, and for being willing to listen to our side as well. It's not very common that I actually have this, so I'm very happy, and I enjoyed speaking with you and hearing your perspective. I'm sure Sister Sara can say the same. And if you ever have any questions, always feel free to ask us. And if you want to have more talks, whether it be private or public, the reason why I like to have talks like this in the public is because I know very well that there are other sisters who have the same questions that you have and that they may benefit from the answers as well. But whether it's public or private, our main goal is to help clarify the misconceptions that sisters may have with regards to Islam, and to help them have a more solid understanding of Islam so that they can have stronger identities, and so that they no longer have to call themselves feminist Muslims. They can proudly say we are Muslims because they know that Islam gives them the solution to all of their problems, alhamdulillah. And so anytime you have any questions, anything you want us to discuss on, feel free to DM me on the Sisters Corner, or you can even DM Sister Sara or me personally anytime, inshallah, and we will always be there to guide you, to help you, to talk with you, inshallah. It has been such a great pleasure. And with that, inshallah, we will end off. And if there are any sisters out there who also have their questions, always feel free to contact us. All of the contact details is in the description box. And if you also are feeling brave and you want to come and join one of our discussions, our podcast, 100%. We won't attack you. We won't eat you. We will have a very decent discussion like we had with Sister Sanjeeda. And I promise you, the way that we enjoyed it, you will also enjoy it. And there's lots to learn, inshallah. So drop us a DM. Let us know if you want to come and have a discussion with us, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. And if you want it to be private, that's okay. That's all right. But in the end, we want you all to benefit, and we pray Allah accepts this from us. And we will see you guys with the next podcast soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.